Marcus Thompson had always dreamed of wearing the red tunic and bearskin hat of the Queen's Guard. Growing up in a small village outside London, he would watch the changing of the guard ceremonies on television with wide eyes, imagining himself standing perfectly still outside Buckingham Palace. His grandfather had served in the Royal Navy, and his father worked as a postman, but Marcus wanted something different. He wanted to serve the crown in the most visible way possible. After years of rigorous training with the Grenadier Guards, Marcus finally achieved his dream at 25. The first time he put on the full ceremonial uniform, he felt a surge of pride that brought tears to his eyes. The weight of the bearskin hat, the stiffness of the red tunic, and the polished boots that reflected the London sky all represented everything he had worked for. The rules were crystal clear from day one. A Queen's Guard must remain motionless. During their duty, regardless of what happens around them, they could not speak to tourists, react to provocations, or break their position under any circumstances. These weren't just guidelines. They were sacred protocols that had been followed for centuries. Breaking them meant immediate dismissal and disgrace. Marcus took these rules seriously. During his first weeks of duty, he endured tourists making faces at him, children trying to make him laugh, and even adults attempting to touch his uniform or rifle. He stood like a statue, eyes fixed straight ahead, breathing steadily through his nose. His fellow guards respected his dedication, and his commanding officers noticed his unwavering discipline. The tourists loved trying to break the guards. It had become a game for many visitors to Buckingham Palace. They would tell jokes, make silly faces, or even pretend to be in distress just to see if they could get a reaction. Most guards had developed thick skin and could ignore almost anything. Marcus was particularly good at this, having developed techniques to focus his mind elsewhere while maintaining perfect posture. On a crisp October morning, Marcus took his position at the palace gates for what seemed like another routine shift. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the courtyard, and the usual crowd of tourists began gathering with their cameras and guidebooks. He had done this hundreds of times before, but something felt different that day. There was an energy in the air that he couldn't quite identify as the morning progressed. Marcus noticed a young woman in the crowd who kept returning to his post. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with short brown hair and a backpack that suggested she was traveling alone. Unlike most tourists who took their photos and moved on, she lingered nearby, sometimes sitting on a nearby bench, sometimes walking past his position, multiple times at first. Marcus thought she might be another tourist trying to break his concentration. He had encountered persistent visitors before who made it their mission to get a reaction from a guard. But as he observed her from his peripheral vision, something seemed off. Her movements were becoming increasingly erratic. She appeared to be talking to herself. The woman's behavior began attracting attention from other tourists, who started pointing and whispering. She was pacing back and forth now, occasionally, stopping to stare directly at Marcus with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Her hands were shaking. She kept reaching into her backpack as if searching for something she couldn't find. Marcus had been trained to identify potential security threats, and his instincts were telling him that this situation was escalating. Beyond normal tourist behavior, however, protocol demanded that he maintain his position and allow the regular security personnel to handle any disturbances. He tried to catch the eye of a nearby police officer, but none were looking in his direction. At that moment, the young woman suddenly approached Marcus directly, standing just inches from his face. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, and he could see that she was trembling. She began speaking rapidly in what sounded like a mix of English and another language, her words becoming increasingly desperate and incoherent. Other tourists started backing away, sensing that something was wrong. Some began taking videos with their phones, treating the situation as entertainment rather than recognizing the distress of someone who clearly needed help. The woman's agitation was growing by the second, and Marcus could see tears streaming down her face. Then, without warning, the woman reached into her backpack and pulled out a small bottle. Marcus's training kicked in immediately as he recognized the potential danger. She raised the bottle toward her mouth with shaking hands, and in that split second, Marcus realized she was about to harm herself in front of hundreds of witnesses, including children. The weight of his decision pressed down on him like a physical force. Every fiber of his training, every oath he had taken, every protocol drilled into him over years of service demanded that he remain motionless. But as he looked into the young woman's desperate eyes, he saw someone who was completely alone in her darkest moment, surrounded by people who were treating her pain as a spectacle. Time seemed to slow down as Marcus watched the bottle move closer. To her lips, he could hear the clicking of camera shutters, the murmur of concerned voices, and the distant sound of London traffic. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it, but his face remained impassive. In that crucial moment, Marcus Thompson, the dedicated Queen's Guard who had never broken protocol in his life, faced the most important decision he would ever make. The choice between following orders and following his conscience would change everything he had worked for, believed in. The young woman's hand was trembling as she prepared to drink whatever was in that bottle, and Marcus knew that in seconds it would be too late to act. The crowd around them seemed frozen, everyone watching but no one moving to help. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders as he realized he might be the only person close enough to prevent a tragedy. His mind raced through the consequences of breaking protocol, while his heart urged him to act. Everything he had dreamed of since childhood was about to be put to the ultimate test. Without hesitation, Marcus broke every rule he had ever been taught. He stepped forward from his position, dropped his ceremonial rifle to the ground with a clatter that echoed across the courtyard, and reached out to grab the bottle from the young woman's hand. The movement was so sudden and unexpected that gasps rose from the crowd of tourists who had been watching the scene unfold. "Please, don't do this," Marcus said softly, his voice gentle but firm, as he carefully took the bottle away from her. The woman looked up at him with surprise, as if she was seeing him for the first time. Her eyes were filled with confusion and pain, but also a flicker of hope that hadn't been there moments before. The crowd around them fell silent, phones still recording but no longer treating the situation as entertainment. They had just witnessed something unprecedented, a Queen's Guard abandoning his post to help a stranger in distress. The weight of what Marcus had done began to sink in as he saw the shocked faces staring back at him. "What's your name?" Marcus asked the young woman, kneeling down to her level while keeping his voice calm and reassuring. She was shaking uncontrollably now, and he could see that she was having some kind of mental health crisis. His training in the military had taught him basic first aid and crisis intervention, but nothing had prepared him for making this choice while on ceremonial duty. "Sarah?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. "I'm Sarah, and I can't do this anymore. Everything is too hard, and nobody understands what I'm going through. I came here because I thought maybe seeing something beautiful would help, but it just made me feel more alone." Marcus nodded, his heart breaking for this young woman who was clearly in tremendous pain. He had sisters around the same age, and the thought of them suffering like this without anyone to help them made his decision feel even more right. Despite the consequences he would certainly face, "Sarah, I understand that everything feels overwhelming right now," Marcus said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "But there are people who want to help you. You're not alone in this, even though it might feel that way. Can you tell me where you're from? Do you have family or friends who are worried about you?" Meanwhile, other palace security personnel had noticed the commotion and were making their way through the crowd. Marcus could see his commanding officer approaching with a face like thunder, and he knew that his career was about to come to an abrupt end. But as he looked at Sarah, who was beginning to calm down slightly, he felt a sense of peace about his decision. Sarah told him she was from Germany, visiting London alone after dropping out of university due to depression and anxiety. She had been struggling with suicidal thoughts for months, and the trip to London was supposed to be a fresh start. Instead, it had made her feel more isolated and desperate than ever. The bottle contained a mixture of various medications she had been saving, planning to end her life in what she thought would be a beautiful location. "I saw you standing there so perfectly, so strong," Sarah said through her tears. "I thought maybe if I did it near someone who represented everything good and noble, it would somehow make sense. But when you spoke to me, when you chose to help me, instead of ignoring me like everyone else, it changed something. The palace security team arrived and immediately began dispersing the crowd. While paramedics were called to assess Sarah's condition, Marcus remained by her side, continuing to talk with her and keep her calm while the situation was being handled. He could feel the eyes of his fellow guards on him, some showing understanding, while others looked disappointed in his breach of protocol. His commanding officer, Colonel Harrison, approached with a stern expression that Marcus had seen many times. During training but never directed at him personally, Colonel Harrison was a career military man who had spent 30 years in service. He took the traditions of the Queen's Guard more seriously than almost anything else in life. "Guard Thompson," Colonel Harrison said formally, his voice carrying. Across the courtyard, despite his attempt to keep the conversation private, "You will return to barracks immediately for debriefing. Your rifle will be collected, and you are suspended from duty pending a full investigation into this incident." Marcus nodded, understanding that this was just the beginning of what would likely be a very difficult process. He had known the moment he stepped out of position that his career as a Queen's Guard was over. But he had also known that he would never be able to live with himself if he had watched Sarah harm herself without trying to help. "Sir, I understand the consequences of my actions," Marcus replied, maintaining his military bearing even as his world crumbled around him. "I accept full responsibility for breaking protocol, and I'm prepared to face whatever disciplinary action is deemed appropriate." As the paramedics worked with Sarah, she kept looking over at Marcus with gratitude in her eyes. The crisis counselor, who had arrived, spoke with her at length and determined that she needed immediate psychiatric care and support. She would be taken to a hospital for evaluation and treatment. But the immediate danger had passed before the ambulance took her away. Sarah managed to speak with Marcus one more time. "Thank you," she said simply. But the weight of those words carried more meaning than any commendation or medal he had ever received. "You saved my life today, not just from what I was going to do, but by showing me that someone cares enough to risk everything to help a stranger." The crowd had been cleared by this time, but videos of the incident were already spreading on social media. Some people were calling Marcus a hero for his compassion and quick action, while others criticized him for abandoning his duty and breaking centuries of tradition. The story was becoming bigger than anyone had anticipated. As Marcus walked back toward the barracks, removing his bearskin hat for what he knew might be the last time, he reflected on the events of the morning. He had spent years working toward this position, sacrificing relationships and opportunities to achieve his dream of serving as a Queen's Guard. Now, in a matter of minutes, it was all gone. But as he thought about Sarah's face when she thanked him and the knowledge that she was alive and getting the help she needed, Marcus realized that he had never felt more proud of his service than he did in that moment. He had upheld something more important than protocol. He had upheld the values of compassion and human dignity that should be at the heart of any true service to others. The debriefing room at Wellington Barracks felt colder than usual as Marcus sat across from Colonel Harrison and two other senior officers. The formal atmosphere was thick with disappointment and tension. On the table between them lay his ceremonial rifle, bearskin hat, and a stack of incident reports that would determine his fate. "Guard Thompson," Colonel Harrison began, his voice measured but stern. "In 28 years of service, I have never encountered such a blatant violation of standing orders. The Queen's Guard has maintained its traditions and protocols for over 3 centuries. These are not mere suggestions. They are the foundation of everything we represent." Marcus sat at attention, his eyes focused straight ahead as he had been trained to do. But unlike his ceremonial duties, this time his mind was fully present in the room, processing every word and accepting the gravity of his situation. He had expected this conversation, but the reality of it was still difficult to face. "Understand the severity of my actions," Marcus replied, when given permission to speak. "I violated direct orders and abandoned my post. There is no excuse for breaking protocol, and I take full responsibility for my decision." The second officer, Major Williams, leaned forward with a frown. "Thompson, do you understand that your actions today have been recorded by dozens of tourists and are already spreading across the internet? The incident has brought unwanted attention to the regiment and has the potential to damage the reputation we have spent generations building." Marcus nodded, having anticipated this concern. Sir, I am aware that my actions may have consequences beyond my own career. I deeply regret any harm caused to the regiment's reputation. Colonel Harrison shuffled through the papers in front of him, many of which appeared to be printouts of social media posts and news articles about the incident. The response has been mixed, Thompson. While some members of the public are calling you a hero, others are outraged that you abandoned your duty. More importantly, your fellow guards are questioning whether the standards they have sworn to uphold mean anything at all. The weight of this statement hit Marcus harder than he had expected. He had never considered that his actions might demoralize or confuse his brothers in arms. These men had become his family over the years, and the thought that he might have let them down was more painful than any disciplinary action he might face. However, Colonel Harrison continued, pausing to look directly at Marcus for the first time during the meeting. I have also received calls from the hospital where the young woman is being treated. The doctors there have confirmed that she was indeed in immediate danger of self-harm, and that your intervention likely saved her life. Marcus felt a small surge of relief. Not for his own situation, but for confirmation that Sarah was safe and receiving proper care. This had been his primary concern throughout the entire ordeal. Even as his career hung in the balance, Major Williams opened another folder and began reading from what appeared to be a psychological evaluation. The crisis counselor who worked with Miss Sarah Mueller provided a statement indicating that she had been planning to take her own life for several weeks. She had specifically chosen the location because she felt it represented something stable and enduring that she could no longer find in her own life. The third officer, Captain Davies, spoke for the first time. Thompson, walk us through your decision-making process. What made you choose to break protocol at that moment? Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that his answer could determine not only his future, but potentially set a precedent for how similar situations might be handled. Sir, I observed the subject's behavior escalating over approximately 30 minutes. Her movements became increasingly erratic, and she appeared to be in severe psychological distress. When she produced the bottle and moved to consume its contents, I assessed that immediate action was required to prevent loss of life. And at what point did you consider the alternative of alerting other security personnel? Captain Davies pressed. Sir, I did attempt to catch the attention of nearby officers, but none were in position to intervene before the subject completed her intended action. I made a split-second assessment that the preservation of human life took precedence over maintaining my ceremonial position. Colonel Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Thompson, you understand that if every guard made individual decisions about when to break protocol, the entire system would collapse. We rely on absolute adherence to orders precisely because we cannot predict every situation that might arise. Yes, sir, I understand completely, Marcus replied. I am not advocating for other guards to make similar decisions, nor am I suggesting that protocol should be flexible. I am simply acknowledging that I made a choice in an extraordinary circumstance, and I am prepared to accept the consequences. The room fell silent for several minutes as the officers reviewed additional documents. Marcus could hear the distant sounds of other guards conducting drill practice in the courtyard, a reminder of the life he was likely leaving behind. The familiar sounds that had once brought him comfort now felt like echoes from a world he no longer belonged to. Major Williams finally broke the silence. Thompson, preliminary findings indicate that you will face a court-martial for violation of standing orders. Minimum sentence would be dismissal from the regiment with loss of all benefits and honors. The maximum could include additional penalties depending on how the case is prosecuted. Marcus nodded, having expected this outcome. Sir, I understand and accept whatever decision is reached. However, Colonel Harrison interjected. There are some unusual circumstances surrounding this case that complicate the standard disciplinary process. The incident has generated significant public attention, and there are already calls from various quarters for leniency in your case. Captain Davies pulled out a tablet showing various news websites and social media feeds. The story has been picked up by major news outlets, Thompson. There are hashtags trending in your support, petitions calling for your reinstatement, and even statements from mental health organizations praising your actions. Marcus was surprised by this development. He had acted on instinct and conscience, never imagining that his decision would resonate with people beyond those who witnessed it firsthand. The idea that strangers were supporting him was both humbling and overwhelming. "There's more," Colonel Harrison continued. "We've received a call from Buckingham Palace. Her Majesty's private secretary has requested a full report on the incident, and there are indications that the royal family is taking a personal interest in the outcome of this case." This news sent a chill through Marcus. The thought that his actions had reached the attention of the Queen herself was terrifying. He had devoted his career to serving the crown, and the possibility that he had brought shame or embarrassment to the royal family was almost unbearable. "Sir, if I may ask," Marcus said hesitantly, "is there any indication of Her Majesty's feelings about the incident?" Colonel Harrison's expression softened slightly. "That Thompson remains to be seen. What I can tell you is that you have forced us all to confront some very difficult questions about duty, compassion, and the role of tradition in modern society. Your case will likely influence how the regiment handles similar situations for years to come." 3 weeks after the incident, Marcus found himself in an unfamiliar position, sitting in his small flat reading newspaper articles about himself while waiting for his court-martial to begin. The story had taken on a life of its own, with people from around the world sharing their opinions about his actions. Support groups for mental health awareness had adopted him as a symbol, while military traditionalists argued that he had undermined centuries of discipline and order. The most unexpected development came in the form of a letter delivered by special messenger. The envelope bore the official seal of Buckingham Palace, and Marcus's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a brief but formal request for him to attend a private meeting with one of Her Majesty's senior advisors before his court-martial. Proceedings began, as Marcus made his way to the palace for this mysterious appointment. He couldn't help but notice the increased security presence and the way staff members looked at him. Some offered encouraging smiles, while others maintained the professional distance that palace protocol demanded. He was escorted through corridors he had guarded but never walked through as a visitor. The advisor, Sir Charles Pemberton, was a distinguished gentleman in his 60s who had served the royal family for over 30 years. His office was filled with portraits of previous monarchs and certificates of service that spoke to a lifetime dedicated to the crown. When Marcus entered, Sir Charles gestured for him to sit in a comfortable chair across from his ornate desk. "Mr. Thompson," Sir Charles began, using his civilian title rather than his military rank, "I want you to know that your situation has been the subject of considerable discussion at the highest levels. The Queen herself has reviewed the incident, reports, and the subsequent public response." Marcus felt his heart rate increase, unsure whether this meeting would bring good news or seal his fate. "Sir, I hope Her Majesty understands that I meant no disrespect to the crown or to the traditions I was sworn to uphold." Sir Charles nodded thoughtfully. "Her Majesty is very much aware of your service record, which has been exemplary until this incident. She is also aware of the circumstances that led to your decision and the outcome of that decision, namely, that a young woman's life was saved." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door, and to Marcus's absolute shock, Queen Elizabeth herself entered the room. He immediately stood and bowed, his mind racing as he tried to process this unprecedented situation. The Queen, despite being in her 90s, carried herself with the same dignity and presence that had defined her reign for over 70 years. "Your Majesty," Marcus stammered, still hardly believing what was happening. "Mr. Thompson," the Queen said in her distinctive voice, "please sit down. I wanted to speak with you personally about recent events." As Marcus sat back down, the Queen took the chair next to Sir Charles's desk, creating an intimate setting that felt surreal, given the formality he was accustomed to in her presence. She studied him for a moment with the keen intelligence that had served her throughout decades of leadership. "I have been monarch for many years, Mr. Thompson," she began, "and I have seen how traditions and protocols serve important purposes. They provide structure, maintain order, and preserve the dignity of institutions that represent something larger than any individual." Marcus nodded, wondering where this conversation was leading, but hanging on every word. However, the Queen continued, I have also learned that true service sometimes requires us to make difficult choices between competing duties. In your case, you chose to prioritize the preservation of human life over the maintenance of ceremonial protocol. The weight of her words settled over Marcus as he realized that the Queen was not speaking to him as a subject who had failed in his duty, but as someone who had faced an impossible choice and acted according to his conscience. "Your Majesty," Marcus said carefully, "I want you to know that breaking protocol was the most difficult decision I have ever made. My service to the crown has been the defining purpose of my life, and I would never want to bring shame or dishonor to the institution I love." The Queen smiled slightly, a warmth entering her expression that few people ever had the privilege of seeing. "Mr. Thompson, do you know what I believe the crown truly represents, ma'am?" "It represents service to others," she said simply. "Not service to ceremony or tradition for their own sake, but service to the people of this nation and to the values we hold dear. Compassion, dignity, and the protection of those who cannot protect themselves are among the highest of those values." Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes as he began to understand what the Queen was telling him. "The young woman you helped, Miss Mueller, has written to me personally," the Queen continued. "She wanted me to know that your actions not only saved her life but restored her faith in human kindness. She is now receiving proper treatment and has begun the process of healing." Sir Charles leaned forward and added, "Miss Mueller has also requested permission to attend your court-martial to provide testimony about the incident. She wants to ensure that the full context of your actions is understood." And both Marcus and Sir Charles immediately rose as well. "Mr. Thompson, I cannot and will not interfere with the military justice process that must now run its course. However, I want you to know that I do not consider your actions to be a betrayal of your oath to serve. Rather, I believe they represent the highest form of that service." As she prepared to leave, the Queen paused and looked directly at Marcus. "Whatever the outcome of your court-martial, you should know that you acted with honor when faced with an extraordinary situation. The crown has been served by your compassion as much as it has been served by your discipline." After the Queen left, Marcus sat in stunned silence with Sir Charles, trying to process what had just occurred. The senior advisor poured him a cup of tea and allowed him several minutes to collect himself before continuing their conversation. "That was quite unprecedented," Sir Charles noted. "Her Majesty rarely involves herself directly in military disciplinary matters, but your case has touched something in her that goes beyond protocol and procedure." Marcus sipped his tea with shaking hands. "Sir, what does this mean for the court-martial?" "It means nothing officially," Sir Charles replied honestly. "The military justice system will proceed according to its own rules and procedures. However, I suspect that Her Majesty's perspective on your actions will become known to those who need to know it." As Marcus prepared to leave the palace, Sir Charles handed him another envelope. "This is a copy of the letter Miss Mueller sent to Her Majesty. I thought you might like to read it before your hearing begins." Walking back through the same corridors where he had once stood guard, Marcus felt a strange mixture of hope and uncertainty. The Queen's words had given him something he hadn't expected: validation that his choice, while costly, had been morally justified. But he also knew that the military court would have to consider factors beyond moral justification, including the precedent his case might set for future incidents. That evening, Marcus opened Miss Muller's letter to the Queen and read about her recovery process. Her gratitude for his intervention and her determination to use her experience to help others struggling with mental health issues she had found purpose in. Her pain and hope in her healing, all because someone had cared enough to break the rules when it mattered most. The courtroom at the Royal Military Academy was packed with an unusual mixture of military personnel, journalists, and members of the public who had been following Marcus's story. The formal proceedings of a court-martial typically attracted little attention beyond military circles, but this case had captured the imagination of people around the world who saw it as a conflict between rigid tradition and human compassion. Marcus sat in his dress uniform, the same red tunic he had worn, on duty but now stripped of the ceremonial accessories that had once filled him with such pride. Across from him, the panel of 5 senior officers who would determine his fate reviewed thick folders of evidence, witness statements, and legal precedents. The weight of their decision would extend far beyond Marcus's personal future. The prosecuting officer, Major Patricia Stone, was known for her thorough preparation and unwavering dedication to military law. As she outlined the charges against Marcus, her voice carried no personal animosity, but rather the cold precision of someone performing a necessary duty. The defendant stands accused of willful disobedience of lawful orders, abandonment of post during ceremonial duty, and conduct prejudicial to good order and military discipline, Major Stone announced. These charges stem from an incident on October 15th when Guard Thompson deliberately violated explicit standing orders that have governed the conduct of the Queen's Guard for centuries. She proceeded to present a detailed timeline of events, supported by tourist videos and witness statements that painted a picture of clear protocol violations. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus had indeed broken every rule that governed his position, and there was no dispute about the basic facts of the case. The defense may argue that extraordinary circumstances justified the defendant's actions. Major Stone continued. But military discipline cannot be subject to individual interpretation based on emotional responses to civilian situations. If we allow soldiers to decide when orders apply and when they don't, we undermine the very foundation of military effectiveness. When it came time for the defense, Captain James Morrison approached the panel with a different strategy. Rather than denying that Marcus had broken protocol, he sought to provide context that would help the court understand why an exemplary soldier had made such a dramatic decision. "Gentlemen," Captain Morrison began, addressing the panel, "Guard Thompson's service record is without blemish. For 3 years, he has performed his duties with distinction, earning commendations from his superiors and respect from his peers. The events of October 15th represent not a failure of character, but a conflict between competing duties that would challenge any soldier's conscience." Captain Morrison then called Sarah Mueller to testify via video link from Germany, where she was continuing her recovery. Her appearance caused a stir in the courtroom, as few people had heard directly from her since the incident. She looked healthier than she had that day at the palace, but her testimony about her mental state revealed the depth of her crisis. "I had been planning to end my life for weeks," Sarah said, her voice steady, despite the difficulty of reliving those moments. "I chose that location because I thought if I was going to die, I wanted it to be somewhere beautiful and meaningful. But when Guard Thompson spoke to me and took action to help me, it changed everything. He didn't just save my life. He showed me that someone cared enough about a stranger to risk everything he had worked for." The impact of her testimony was visible on the faces of everyone in the courtroom. Several officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned forward to catch every word. This was no longer an abstract discussion about military protocol, but a real-world example of life and death consequences. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, psychiatrist who had treated Sarah, provided expert testimony about the severity of her condition and the critical importance of immediate intervention in suicide prevention. In cases like Miss Muller's, seconds can mean the difference between life and death. Any delay in response could have resulted in tragedy. The most dramatic moment came when Captain Morrison called Colonel Harrison to testify about Marcus's character and service record. The colonel's position was particularly difficult. He was torn between his duty to uphold military discipline and his recognition of Marcus's exceptional service and moral courage. "Guard Thompson has been one of our finest soldiers," Colonel Harrison testified, his voice heavy with emotion. "His dedication to duty has been absolute, which makes his decision on that day all the more significant. This was not a soldier who took breaking protocol lightly. It was someone who faced an impossible choice and acted according to his deepest convictions about service and humanity." When asked about the potential impact of Marcus's actions on military discipline, Colonel Harrison paused for a long moment before answering. "I believe that true discipline includes the moral courage to do what is right, even when it comes at great personal cost. While I cannot condone violations of protocol, I cannot condemn a soldier for choosing to preserve human life when faced with immediate danger." The prosecution's rebuttal focused on the broader implications of accepting individual judgment over established orders. Major Stone argued that sympathy for Marcus's motives could not override the necessity of maintaining absolute discipline within military ranks. If we excuse this violation, how do we maintain the standards that define military service? Asked, what happens when other soldiers decide that their personal interpretation of right and wrong supersedes their sworn duty to follow orders? The defendant's actions, however well-intentioned, represent a dangerous precedent that could undermine military effectiveness. As the testimony concluded, Marcus was given the opportunity to address the court. He stood at attention, his voice clear and steady as he spoke without notes or preparation, drawing on the same inner strength that had carried him through his decision at the palace gates. I understand the gravity of my actions and the importance of the principles at stake in this proceeding, Marcus began. I have devoted my career to serving the crown and upholding the traditions of the Queen's Guard. Breaking protocol was the most difficult decision I have ever made, and I do not expect others to excuse it simply because the outcome was positive. Looking directly at each member of the panel. However, I believe that our duty as soldiers extends beyond the mechanical following of orders to include the preservation of the values those orders are meant to protect. When I saw a young woman about to take her own life, I faced a choice. Between maintaining my ceremonial position and preventing a tragedy, I chose to act according to my conscience, knowing full well the consequences I would face. Marcus's final words resonated throughout the silent courtroom. I do not regret my decision, and I would make the same choice again under similar circumstances. If that makes me unfit for military service, then I accept that judgment. But I cannot accept that true service to the crown requires us to stand by and watch preventable tragedies unfold in the name of protocol. The panel retired to deliberate, leaving Marcus and his supporters to wait for a decision that would determine not only his future, but potentially influence military policy for years to come. The weight of tradition, the value of human life, and the meaning of true service all hung in the balance as the judges considered their verdict. After 3 hours of deliberation, the panel returned to deliver their verdict. The courtroom was completely silent as the presiding officer, Brigadier General Robert Whitmore, stood to address the court. His weathered face showed no emotion. As he looked directly at Marcus, who stood at attention waiting to learn his fate, Guard Thompson, Brigadier General Whitmore began, his voice carrying the authority of decades of military service. This court has carefully considered all evidence, testimony, and arguments presented in this case. We have weighed the serious nature of your protocol violations against the extraordinary circumstances that prompted your actions. Marcus felt his heart pounding as he waited for the verdict that would determine whether he would leave the military in disgrace or somehow find a path forward in his chosen career. On the charge of willful disobedience of lawful orders, this court finds you guilty, the Brigadier General announced. A collective gasp rose from the gallery, but he continued without pause. On the charge of abandonment of post during ceremonial duty, this court finds you guilty. On the charge of conduct prejudicial to good order and military discipline, this court finds you guilty as charged. The weight of these words hit Marcus like physical blows, even though he had expected this outcome. Hearing the formal pronouncement of his guilt made the end of his military career feel final and irreversible. However, Brigadier General Whitmore continued, raising his voice slightly to quiet the murmurs from the audience. This court also recognizes that your actions were motivated by the highest principles of service and resulted in the preservation of human life. We acknowledge that you faced an extraordinary situation requiring immediate action to prevent loss of life. The unexpected shift in tone gave Marcus a glimmer of hope, though he tried not to let his emotions show on his face. Therefore, while this court cannot overlook your violations of military protocol, we sentence you to reduction in rank from guard to private, forfeiture of 6 months' pay, and reassignment from ceremonial duties to regular military service. You will not be dismissed. From the regiment, the courtroom erupted in surprised conversation as people processed this unexpected decision. Marcus felt his knees weaken with relief while his career as a Queen's Guard was over. He would remain a soldier and maintain his service to the crown, albeit in a different capacity. Brigadier General Whitmore raised his hand for silence. and continued with the most surprising part of his statement. Additionally, this court recommends that military protocol be reviewed to provide clear guidance for situations involving immediate threats to civilian life during ceremonial duties. Your case has highlighted a gap in our procedures that requires attention. As the formal proceedings concluded, Marcus was surrounded by well-wishers, journalists, and fellow soldiers offering their support. The verdict had satisfied no one completely. Traditionalists felt it was too lenient, while his supporters thought the punishment was too harsh, but it represented a compromise that acknowledged both the importance of military discipline and the value of moral courage. Colonel Harrison approached Marcus as the crowd began to disperse. "Thompson, I want you to know that while I cannot publicly endorse what you did, I am proud to continue serving alongside you. Your new assignment will be with the training division, where you'll help prepare the next generation of guards. Your experience and judgment will be valuable assets." Over the following weeks, Marcus adjusted to his new role and reduced rank. The work was different but meaningful. He found satisfaction in teaching young recruits not just about protocol and procedure, but about the deeper principles of service that had guided his decision that day at the palace gates. The most meaningful correspondence came from Sarah Mueller, who had been following the court-martial proceedings closely. She wrote to Marcus regularly, updating him on her recovery progress and her new work with suicide prevention organizations. Her life had taken on new purpose as she used her experience to help others who were struggling with similar darkness. "You gave me more than just my life back," she wrote in one letter. "You showed me that someone cared enough about a stranger to sacrifice everything for them. That act of compassion has inspired me to dedicate my life to helping others find hope in their darkest moments. In a way, you saved not just me, but all the people I'll be able to help because I'm still here." 6 months after the court-martial, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at the training facility. Sir Charles Pemberton arrived with another official envelope bearing the royal seal, this one containing an invitation that left Marcus speechless. The Queen had decided to present Marcus with the Royal Humane Society Medal for his actions in saving Sarah's life. The ceremony would be small and private, recognizing his courage while respecting the military court's judgment about protocol violations. On the day of the ceremony, Marcus found himself once again in the Queen's presence, but this time wearing his regular military uniform rather than the ceremonial red tunic he had once been so proud of. As she pinned the medal to his chest, the Queen spoke quietly so that only he could hear. "Mr. Thompson, true service sometimes requires difficult choices. You chose compassion over protocol, humanity over tradition, and courage over convenience. This medal recognizes not just your actions on that October morning, but your character as a soldier and as a man."
Oh.
As Marcus left Buckingham Palace that day, he reflected on the journey that had brought him from his childhood. Dreams of ceremonial service to this moment of recognition for breaking the very protocols he had sworn to uphold. His career had taken an unexpected path, but he realized that he was serving the crown in a way that was perhaps more meaningful than standing motionless at palace gates. The young recruits he now trained would learn not just about discipline and tradition, but about the moral courage required to make difficult decisions under pressure. They would understand that true service sometimes means choosing the harder path, even when it comes at great personal cost. Years later, Marcus would look back on that October morning as the defining moment of his life, not because it ended one chapter of his service, but because it began another one that was grounded in the deepest values of duty, compassion, and sacrifice for others. Sarah Mueller eventually moved to London and established a crisis intervention program that helped countless individuals find hope in their darkest moments. She and Marcus remained friends, bound together by that moment when one person's choice to care made all the difference in the world. The protocol changes recommended by the court martial were eventually implemented, giving future guards clear guidance on how to respond to life-threatening emergencies while maintaining their ceremonial duties. Marcus's case became part of military training curricula, studied as an example of moral courage and the complex decisions that soldiers sometimes face. In the end, Marcus Thompson learned that sometimes the greatest service requires breaking the rules, and that true honor lies not in blind obedience to protocol, but in the courage to act according to one's conscience when human life hangs in the balance. His sacrifice of career advancement for human compassion had created ripples that would continue to influence military service and save lives for generations to come.